The sepia-toned photograph sits on my desk, illuminated by the warm glow of my desk lamp. 5 young women in high-necked Edwardian dresses, their faces solemn as was customary for photographs of the era. The elegant script on the back reads, "The Sullivan Sisters, 1908. I've seen this photograph hundreds of times before. It belonged to my grandmother, passed down through generations. But tonight, something compels me to look closer. Perhaps it's the storm raging outside, or perhaps it's the strange dreams I've been having lately. Dreams of whispers and shadows, and 5 women calling my name. I reach for my magnifying glass, an antique piece itself, and begin to examine each sister in turn. The eldest, Margaret, stands rigid and proud. The second, Elizabeth, with her characteristic half-smile. And then the third sister, Catherine. Something about her has always seemed different. I lean in closer, adjusting my magnifying glass over her neck, and that's when I see it. What appears to be a pendant at first glance is something else entirely. A strange mark, or is it a hand? Tiny skeletal fingers wrapped around her throat, so subtle they blend into the shadows of the photograph, invisible unless you're looking for them. My blood runs cold as I realize what I'm seeing. I've spent years researching my family history, but nothing prepared me for this. The photograph slips from my trembling fingers as thunder crashes outside, plunging my apartment into darkness. The story of the Sullivan sisters began long before this moment, and now I fear it's far from over. Rose Hill Manor, Massachusetts, April 1908. The evening air carried the sweet scent of apple blossoms as Henry Sullivan, a prominent local industrialist, paced nervously in his study. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked relentlessly, marking the passing minutes with solemn precision. Henry paused to straighten his cravat in the ornate mirror above the fireplace, his reflection revealing a man of 50 whose once dark hair had surrendered to gray, particularly at the temples. "They'll be here soon, dear," Eleanor Sullivan said softly from the doorway. At 45, she remained a handsome woman, though worry had etched fine lines around her eyes. Her burgundy dress rustled as she crossed the room to adjust her husband's collar. "Everything must be perfect," Henry muttered, more to himself than to his wife. "Dr. Blackwood is not a man to be kept waiting." Eleanor's fingers stilled on his collar. "Must we go through with this, Henry? The girls will do as they're told," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Catherine especially. I've indulged her whims for far too long. It's time she understood her duty to this family." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken concerns. The Sullivans had 5 daughters: Margaret, Elizabeth, Catherine, Anne, and young Josephine. Beautiful, accomplished young women who had been raised with every advantage money could provide. But the family's fortunes had suffered in recent years. The new century had brought changes that Henry's textile mills had failed to adapt to. Bankruptcy loomed like a specter over Rose Hill Manor. Dr. Ambrose Blackwood, with his mysterious wealth and connections, offered a solution. A marriage to his son would secure the Sullivans' position in society and resolve their financial troubles. That the prospective groom was nearly twice Catherine's age seemed, to Henry at least, a small price to pay. "Mother? Father?" Margaret's voice called from the hallway. At 24, she was the eldest Sullivan daughter, practical and dutiful to a fault. "The photographer has arrived. Shall we proceed with the portrait before Dr. Blackwood arrives?" Henry checked his pocket watch. "Yes, that's sensible. Where are your sisters?" "In the drawing room, Father, all except Catherine. She's still upstairs." Henry's expression darkened. "Fetch her, immediately." As Margaret hurried away, Eleanor touched her husband's arm. "She's only 18, Henry. Can you blame her for being frightened?" "Frightened?" Henry scoffed. "What does she have to be frightened of? The Blackwoods are one of the oldest families in New England. This marriage will secure her future, all our futures." Eleanor wanted to argue but held her tongue. Something about Ambrose Blackwood and his son unsettled her deeply. Their ancient house on the edge of town, Ravenscroft, had always been the subject of whispers among the townspeople. Strange lights seen at odd hours, unusual visitors arriving under cover of darkness, peculiar sounds carried on the night wind. But Henry dismissed such talk as provincial superstition, the jealous gossip of those less fortunate. Upstairs, Catherine Sullivan sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection with growing despair. Her dark hair was pinned elegantly, her green dress, her finest, pressed and perfect. Yet she felt as though she were dressing for her own funeral rather than a formal portrait and dinner party. A soft knock at the door preceded Margaret's entrance. Her older sister's face was a mask of sympathetic determination. "Catherine, you must come down. Father is growing impatient and the photographer is waiting." Catherine turned, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "I cannot marry him, Margaret. There's something wrong about him, about all of them." Margaret crossed the room and took her sister's hands. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but think of the family, of mother and father, of all of us. This alliance will save Rosehill." "At what cost?" Catherine whispered. Before Margaret could answer, Elizabeth appeared in the doorway. At 22, the second Sullivan sister was known for her beauty and charm. "The Blackwoods have arrived early," she announced, her voice tight with tension. "Father is asking for you both. Now." Catherine rose on shaky legs, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "I suppose there's no delaying the inevitable." The three sisters made their way downstairs arm in arm in a show of solidarity. In the grand entrance hall, Anne and Josephine, 19 and 16 respectively, already stood in a line, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. And there, being greeted by Henry with excessive cordiality, stood Dr. Ambrose Blackwood and his son Thaddeus. Dr. Blackwood was tall and slender, with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His black suit was impeccably tailored, his bearing aristocratic, but it was his hands that drew Catherine's attention. Long, pale fingers that reminded her of spider legs, constantly in motion as he spoke. Beside him, Thaddeus Blackwood presented a stark contrast to his father. Where the elder Blackwood was animated and engaging, the son was still, almost unnaturally so. Thaddeus was handsome in a severe way, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair slicked back from a high forehead. But his eyes— Catherine suppressed a shudder. They were black, so dark that pupil and iris were indistinguishable, and they held no warmth whatsoever. "Ah, and here are the rest of your lovely daughters," Dr. Blackwood exclaimed, turning his unsettling gaze toward the staircase. "Exquisite, every one of them. You are truly blessed, Henry." "Indeed I am," Henry agreed, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "May I present my eldest, Margaret, followed by Elizabeth, and this is Catherine." At the mention of her name, Catherine felt Thaddeus Blackwood's eyes fix upon her with sudden interest. The intensity of his gaze made her skin crawl. "Miss Catherine," he said, his voice surprisingly melodious for a man of his imposing presence. "I've heard much about you. Your father speaks highly of your accomplishments." Catherine managed a curtsy, keeping her eyes downcast. "You are too kind, Mr. Blackwood." "Please," he stepped forward, taking her hand, before she could withdraw it. "Call me Thaddeus. After all, we shall be family soon enough." His touch was cold, almost frigid, and Catherine had to resist the urge to snatch her hand away. Instead, she endured the formal kiss he placed upon her knuckles, a gesture that lasted several seconds too long. "Well then," Henry clapped his hands together, breaking the uncomfortable moment. "The photographer is waiting in the drawing room. Shall we proceed with the portrait before dinner?" "An excellent suggestion." Dr. Blackwood nodded. "Though perhaps just the sisters for now, a keepsake of their youth and beauty before life's changes." The way he emphasized the word changes sent a chill down Catherine's spine. In the drawing room, the photographer, a nervous man named Mr. Parker, had set up his equipment. A large camera stood on a tripod, facing an ornate settee, and several high-backed chairs arranged before the fireplace. "Ladies, if you would be so kind as to arrange yourselves," Mr. Parker instructed, disappearing beneath the black cloth behind his camera. "The eldest in the center, perhaps." Margaret took her position in the middle chair, with Elizabeth standing just behind her right shoulder. Catherine was placed to Margaret's left, with Anne beside her and young Josephine seated on a small stool at Margaret's feet. "Perfect, perfect," Mr. Parker muttered. "Now please remain very still. The exposure will take several seconds." As the sisters held their positions, Catherine became aware of Thaddeus Blackwood watching from the doorway. His gaze never left her, and in the periphery of her vision, she thought she saw something strange. A shadow that didn't quite match his form, stretching and undulating behind him like smoke. "Miss Catherine, please face forward," Mr. Parker called out. Catherine turned her attention back to the camera, forcing her expression into one of serene dignity. But as she did so, she felt something, a sensation like cold fingers brushing against the nape of her neck. She might have dismissed it as a draft from the window, except the touch became more deliberate, wrapping around to the front of her throat. She wanted to scream, to brush away whatever was touching her, but Mr. Parker had just removed the lens cap for the exposure. To move now would ruin the photograph, so Catherine remained frozen, her heart hammering in her chest as the invisible fingers seemed to tighten ever so slightly around her neck. "Excellent," Mr. Parker finally announced. "I believe we have captured a fine image. Would you care to see the plate, Mr. Sullivan?" As Henry and the others moved to inspect the glass negative, Catherine reached up to touch her neck. There was nothing there, of course, yet the sensation of cold lingered on her skin. "Are you unwell, sister?" Anne whispered, noticing Catherine's distress. "It's nothing," Catherine lied. "Just a chill." But across the room she caught Thaddeus Blackwood watching her, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his thin lips. The dinner that followed was an elaborate affair, with the family's best silver and china displayed proudly. Catherine barely touched her food, her appetite vanished. Seated beside Thaddeus, she was acutely aware of his every movement, the way he barely ate or drank, the unnatural stillness with which he held himself. "I understand you enjoy poetry, Miss Catherine," he said during a lull in the conversation, "particularly the romantics. Shelley and Byron, I believe." Surprised that he would know such a detail about her, Catherine nodded. "Yes, though my father considers such reading frivolous." "Not at all," Thaddeus countered. "The romantics understood something vital about the world, that beneath the veneer of civilization lies powerful, primal forces, forces that cannot be tamed, only channeled." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Forces that some of us are born to command." Before Catherine could respond to this strange declaration, Dr. Blackwood rose from his seat at Henry's right hand. "My friends," he announced, lifting his wine glass, "I would like to propose a toast. To new beginnings and old bloodlines. To the union of our families, which I believe will produce most interesting results." The adults raised their glasses, though Catherine noticed her mother's hand trembled slightly. Across the table, her sisters watched with varying expressions. Margaret resigned, Elizabeth concerned, Anne confused, and young Josephine clearly frightened, though she tried to hide it. "And now," Dr. Blackwood continued, "if it pleases you, Henry, I have brought a small gift to commemorate this occasion." He removed from his jacket a small velvet box, which he passed down the table to Thaddeus. Thaddeus opened the box and removed what appeared to be a necklace. The pendant caught the light from the chandelier, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the white tablecloth. It was an unusual piece, a dark red stone set in intricate silver filigree that resembled intertwined fingers or perhaps thin branches. "A family heirloom," Dr. Blackwood explained, "said to protect the wearer from harmful influences. If I may be so bold, I would ask that Catherine wear it as a symbol of our family's imminent union." Before Catherine could object, Thaddeus had risen from his seat and moved behind her chair. She felt his cold fingers brush against her skin as he fastened the necklace around her throat. The pendant settled against her collarbone, heavier than it appeared and unnaturally cold. "There," Thaddeus murmured, his breath chilling her ear. "It suits you perfectly, as if it were made for you." Catherine resisted the urge to tear the necklace off. Something about it felt wrong, invasive somehow, as if it were not merely resting against her skin but attempting to sink into it. As the evening progressed, Catherine grew increasingly lightheaded. Colors seemed too bright, sounds too sharp. When Thaddeus requested her company for a turn about the room, she found herself unable to refuse, though her instincts screamed at her to flee. "You feel it already, don't you?" he asked as they stood by the window, momentarily apart from the others. "The pendant's influence." "I don't know what you mean," Catherine replied, though her hand unconsciously rose to touch the strange jewel. "Of course you do." Thaddeus smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp in the lamplight. "You're special, Catherine. Different from your sisters. More receptive to certain energies. My father recognized it immediately. It's why you were chosen." "Chosen for what?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. Thaddeus's smile widened. "To continue our line, of course. To bear children with unique gifts. The Blackwood bloodline must remain pure in its impurity, if you understand my meaning." Catherine didn't understand, not fully, but a deep, primal part of her recognized the threat in his words. "Excuse me," she managed to say. "I'm feeling rather faint. I should retire." "Of course." Thaddeus inclined his head. "Rest well, my dear. The pendant will help prepare you for what's to come." Catherine fled the drawing room, ignoring her father's disapproving look. In her bedroom, she immediately tried to remove the necklace, but the clasp refused to open. Panicking now, she tugged harder, but the chain merely seemed to tighten in response. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Catherine." It was Elizabeth. "May I come in?" Catherine hastily covered the necklace with her high collar before calling out permission to enter. Elizabeth slipped inside, her face drawn with worry. "Are you all right? You left so suddenly." "I'm fine," Catherine lied. "Just tired." Elizabeth wasn't fooled. "It's him, isn't it? Thaddeus Blackwood. There's something not right about him." Catherine hesitated, then decided to confide in her sister. "Elizabeth, I cannot marry him. He speaks of strange things, bloodlines and energies and gifts. And this necklace." She pulled down her collar to reveal the pendant, which now seemed to pulse with a dim red light. Elizabeth gasped. "Catherine, that looks wrong somehow. Let me help you remove it." But when Elizabeth touched the chain, she recoiled as if burned. "It's ice cold. And did it just move?" Catherine rushed to her mirror. In the glass, she could see the pendant more clearly now. The silver filigree did indeed appear to be slowly shifting, the metal strands writhing like tiny snakes or fingers, and the stone at its center seemed deeper somehow, as if it contained depths beyond its size. "We must speak to Mother," Elizabeth decided. "She wouldn't want you to marry into that family if she knew." "Knew what?" Both sisters turned to find Margaret standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "What are you two whispering about?" Elizabeth quickly explained their concerns, but Margaret's expression remained skeptical. "You're letting your imagination run wild," she scolded. "The Blackwoods are certainly unusual, but they're highly respected. And this match is important to Father." "More important than Catherine's happiness? Her safety?" Elizabeth challenged. Margaret's facade cracked slightly. "Of course not. But what would you have us do? Father has already accepted the proposal. The contracts are being drawn up." "Then I'll run away," Catherine declared suddenly. "Tonight, I will not marry that man." "Don't be absurd," Margaret began, but Elizabeth interrupted. "I'll help you," she said firmly. "We can go to Aunt Judith in New York. She's always said we should visit." Margaret looked torn between duty and concern for her sister. Finally, she sighed. "If you're determined to do this, you'll need money." She removed a pearl brooch from her dress. "Take this. You can sell it in the city." Catherine embraced her eldest sister, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Margaret." "Don't thank me yet," Margaret warned. "If Father discovers I helped you, there will be consequences. You must leave no trace of where you've gone." The sisters quickly formulated a plan. Catherine would slip out after midnight when the house was quiet. Elizabeth would create a diversion at breakfast to delay the discovery of her absence. Margaret would leave a misleading clue suggesting Catherine had fled west rather than east. As her sisters left to prepare, Catherine began packing a small valise with essentials. The necklace continued to trouble her. It seemed to be growing warmer now, pulsating against her skin in rhythm with her heartbeat. She tried once more to remove it, using scissors to cut the chain, but the metal would not yield. Outside her window, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain. A storm was brewing, both literally and figuratively. Catherine knew that running away would create a scandal, that her father might even disown her. But anything was better than becoming Mrs. Thaddeus Blackwood. As midnight approached, Catherine changed into her simplest dress and sturdiest boots. She donned a dark cloak and picked up her valise, taking one last look around the room that had been hers since childhood. On her vanity lay the book of poetry Thaddeus had mentioned, Byron's collected works. She hadn't told him of her interest in the romantics. No one knew except her sisters. How had he known? A sudden gust of wind blew her curtains inward, and with it came a sound, a soft rhythmic tapping at her window. Catherine froze, listening intently. The tapping continued, almost like fingernails against glass. Cautiously, she approached the window and pulled back the curtain. Nothing was there except the swaying branches of the old oak tree that stood outside. But as she watched, one of the branches seemed to move differently from the others, not swaying in the wind, but deliberately reaching toward her window. And at the end of the branch, the twigs curled and uncurled in a manner disturbingly reminiscent of fingers. Catherine stumbled backward, her heart racing. She had to leave now, immediately. Grabbing her valise, she crept to her door and opened it slowly, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. Catherine moved silently toward the servants' staircase at the far end, which would lead her down to the kitchen and out through the garden door. She had nearly reached the stairs when a floorboard creaked behind her. Catherine spun around, expecting to see one of her sisters or perhaps a servant. Instead, she found herself face to face with Thaddeus Blackwood. He stood perfectly still, watching her with those bottomless black eyes. He wore the same formal attire from dinner, showing no signs of having retired for the evening. "Going somewhere, Miss Sullivan?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. Catherine clutched her valise tighter. "Mr. Blackwood, I was just getting some air. The storm." Her voice trailed off as he took a step toward her. "You disappoint me, Catherine," he said softly. "I had hoped you would come to understand the honor being bestowed upon you. The Blackwood lineage extends back centuries, to places and times your history books have forgotten. We have walked with gods and demons alike." "Please," Catherine whispered. "Let me pass." Thaddeus smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You've been chosen, Catherine." The pendant has already begun its work. As if responding to his words, the necklace suddenly burned against her skin. Catherine gasped in pain, her free hand flying to her throat. To her horror, she could feel the silver filigree moving beneath her fingers, extending tendrils that seemed to be burrowing into her flesh. "What have you done to me?" she demanded, fear giving way to anger. "I've marked you," Thaddeus replied simply. "The pendant contains a fragment of our family's guardian, a being that has protected and guided the Blackwoods for generations. It seeks a host, a vessel to carry the next generation. You should be honored." Lightning flashed again, closer now, and in that brief illumination, Catherine saw something that defied comprehension. Behind Thaddeus, stretching up the wall and across the ceiling, was a shadow that did not match his form. It was vast, with too many limbs, too many angles, its edges constantly shifting and reforming, and it seemed to be looking directly at her. Catherine screamed, but the sound died in her throat as invisible fingers constricted around her neck. The pendant burned hotter, and she could feel something moving beneath her skin, spreading outward from the point where the jewel touched her collarbone. "Don't fight it," Thaddeus advised, watching her struggle with clinical detachment. "The more you resist, the more painful the integration will be." Desperate, Catherine swung her valise at him with all her strength. It connected with his head, sending him staggering backward. In that moment of distraction, she turned and fled toward the stairs, no longer caring about silence. Behind her, Thaddeus let out a sound that was not quite human, a high, keening wail that seemed to pierce through her skull. The shadows in the hallway writhed and twisted, reaching for her with elongated fingers. Catherine practically fell down the servants' stairs, catching herself on the banister at the last moment. She could hear movement above her now, voices, footsteps, confusion. Her flight had woken the household. In the kitchen, she fumbled with the latch on the garden door, her fingers clumsy with terror. Finally, it gave way, and she burst out into the storm. Rain lashed at her face as she ran across the lawn toward the gate that led to the woods beyond. If she could reach the town, find help. But the pendant continued its assault, tendrils of pain spreading through her chest and up her neck. Each step became more difficult, as if she were wading through molasses. Behind her, she heard the garden door slam open. Thaddeus was in pursuit. The woods loomed before her, dark and forbidding. Catherine hesitated for a fraction of a second. The forest at night had frightened her since childhood, but the alternative was far worse. She plunged into the trees, using the intermittent lightning to guide her way. The path was muddy and treacherous, branches whipping at her face as she ran. The pendant's pain intensified with each passing moment, and Catherine could feel her strength ebbing. Whatever was happening to her, it was accelerating. She had no idea how long she ran or how far. The woods seemed endless, the storm relentless. Eventually, her foot caught on an exposed root and she fell hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. As she lay there, gasping, she became aware of a presence nearby. Lifting her head, Catherine saw a figure standing among the trees ahead. Relief flooded through her. Perhaps it was a woodsman or a traveler who could help her. But as lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene, her relief turned to horror. It wasn't Thaddeus who stood before her, but it wasn't a potential rescuer either. The figure was tall and gaunt, its proportions subtly wrong, as if human features had been stretched and distorted. And its face, Catherine bit back a scream. Where a face should have been was only a smooth, blank expanse of skin, interrupted by a single vertical slit that pulsed and writhed. The faceless figure took a step toward her, moving with an unnatural fluidity. All around it, the shadows of the forest seemed to bend and flow, drawn to it like iron filings to a magnet. Catherine scrambled backward, her hand closing around a fallen branch. She held it before her like a weapon, though she knew instinctively it would provide no protection against this entity. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling. The figure paused, tilting its featureless head as if curious. Then, to Catherine's shock, it spoke, not with a voice, but directly into her mind. Vessel. The word reverberated through her consciousness, alien and invasive. It carried with it impressions of vast, cold spaces, of ancient hunger, of patient malevolence. "I am not your vessel," Catherine declared, surprising herself with her defiance. "I don't know what you are, but I want no part of it. Not yours to choose. The pendant has marked you. The Blackwood heir must be born." As the entity communicated, Catherine felt the pendant's tendrils burrow deeper. Blood trickled down her chest from beneath the stone, staining her dress. The pain was becoming unbearable, white-hot needles tracing patterns beneath her skin. In desperation, Catherine looked around for any means of escape. The storm had intensified, rain falling in sheets that transformed the forest floor into a quagmire. Lightning struck a nearby tree, splitting it with a deafening crack, and in that moment of brilliant illumination, Catherine saw something that gave her pause. Beyond the faceless entity, partially hidden by the undergrowth, stood a small stone structure, an ancient mausoleum or crypt of some kind, its entrance marked by symbols that seemed to writhe and shift like the pendant's filigree. Catherine didn't know what the structure was, but she sensed it was significant, perhaps even the source of whatever power the Blackwoods commanded. And if that was true, then maybe. She struggled to her feet, still clutching the branch. "What are you?" she demanded, playing for time. "What do you want with the Blackwoods? With me?" The entity drifted closer, the slit in its face pulsing faster. "I am the guardian, the keeper, the door and the key. Through me, the Blackwoods transcend. Through you, the line continues." Its mental voice grew stronger, more invasive, pushing against the boundaries of Catherine's consciousness. She felt her thoughts becoming sluggish, her will weakening. The pendant's tendrils had reached her throat now, wrapping around it in a grotesque mirror of the entity's earlier touch during the photograph. With the last of her strength, Catherine hurled the branch at the entity's head and lunged to the side, making a desperate dash for the stone structure. The guardian made no move to pursue her physically, but she felt its presence press harder against her mind, trying to seize control of her limbs. Catherine staggered through the rain toward the crypt. As she drew closer, she could see that the symbols carved into its stone surface were not random designs but a form of writing, ancient and inhuman, but writing nonetheless. And at the center of the entrance, set into the stone, was an indentation that matched the shape of her pendant. Understanding dawned. The pendant wasn't just a marker or a tool of possession. It was a key to whatever lay within this structure. Behind her she heard Thaddeus's voice, calling her name. He had found her. Time was running out. Catherine reached the crypt and pressed her hand against the stone door. It was ice cold despite the warm spring night, and she could feel vibrations within, as if something massive was moving on the other side. "Do not open the door," the guardian's mental voice thundered. "You know not what you do." But Catherine did know, or at least she understood enough. Whatever bound the guardian to the Blackwoods, whatever granted them their unnatural power and longevity, it was connected to this place, to this door. With trembling hands, she reached for the pendant around her neck. The pain was excruciating as she grasped it, the tendrils that had burrowed into her skin resisting her pull. Blood flowed freely now, soaking the front of her dress. "Catherine!" Thaddeus appeared at the edge of the clearing, his clothes sodden, his face twisted with rage. "Step away from there! You don't understand what you're meddling with!" "I understand enough," Catherine replied, her voice stronger than she felt. With a final desperate yank, she tore the pendant from her throat, taking flesh with it. The pain was blinding, but her hand moved of its own accord, fitting the bloodied jewel into the indentation on the door. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ground beneath their feet began to shake violently. The air itself seemed to ripple and distort like heat waves over summer pavement, and from within the crypt came a sound, a vast, hungry sound, like the inhalation of something that had not breathed for eons. The guardian's blank face contorted, the vertical slit widening into a maw filled with impossible geometries. It lunged toward Catherine, no longer subtle or patient. "What have you done? The door opens both ways." Thaddeus, too, rushed forward, his human facade falling away to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath. His skin rippled and shifted, features realigning into patterns that hurt Catherine's eyes to behold. But before either could reach her, the stone door of the crypt swung inward with a groan of ages, and from the blackness beyond emerged nothing visible at least. But Catherine could feel it. A presence far vaster and more alien than the Guardian, a consciousness so immense that merely brushing against it threatened to shatter her mind. The Guardian shrieked, a sound that existed simultaneously in Catherine's head and in the physical world, shattering nearby trees and sending birds fleeing from miles around. It turned from her, facing the open doorway, its form elongating and expanding as if preparing for battle. Thaddeus reached Catherine, grabbing her arm with fingers that were now too long, too jointed. "You fool!" he hissed, his voice layered with inhuman harmonics. "You've released it, the progenitor. The Guardian was but a fragment, a controlled extension. This is beyond containment." Catherine pulled away from him, her survival instinct giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. "Then perhaps your family should never have bounded in the first place," she retorted. The invisible presence from the crypt surged forward, engulfing the Guardian. Catherine couldn't see the battle that ensued, but she could feel it. Reality itself seemed to buckle and warp around the two entities, trees bending at impossible angles, rain freezing in midair, the very fabric of existence straining under forces it was never designed to contain. Thaddeus abandoned Catherine, rushing toward the conflict with arms outstretched, chanting words in a language that predated humanity. Whatever he was attempting, it came too late. There was a moment of perfect stillness, rain suspended, wind silenced, the forest holding its breath. Then, with a sound like the universe tearing at its seams, both entities vanished. Not destroyed, Catherine somehow knew, but removed, cast back into whatever realm they had originally inhabited, taking with them the doorway and the power it had granted to the Blackwood line for centuries. The backlash of their departure hit like a physical wave. Catherine was thrown backward, tumbling head over heels until she slammed into the trunk of an oak tree. Pain exploded through her body and darkness claimed her consciousness. When she awoke, sunlight filtered through the canopy above. The storm had passed, leaving the forest washed clean. Catherine sat up gingerly, every muscle protesting. Her neck and chest burned where the pendant had attached itself, but when she touched the area, she felt only smooth scar tissue, as if the wounds were months rather than hours old. Of the crypt, there was no sign, only a shallow depression in the earth where it had stood. The pendant, too, was gone. Whatever had happened in the night, all physical evidence had vanished with the entities. Catherine struggled to her feet and began the long walk back to Rosehill Manor. She had no illusion that her ordeal was over. Her father would be furious, the scandal of her flight enormous. But those concerns seemed trivial now, after what she had witnessed. As she emerged from the forest, Rosehill came into view, its elegant facade gleaming in the morning sun. Catherine was surprised to see no signs of disturbance, no search parties, no police. It was as if her disappearance had gone unnoticed. She approached cautiously, circling around to the kitchen entrance. Through the window she could see the cook and maids going about their morning routines, behaving perfectly normally. Stranger still, when she glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall, it showed just past 6 in the morning, barely 6 hours after she had fled. Catherine slipped in through the garden door and made her way upstairs, avoiding the main areas where she might be seen. The house was quiet, everyone apparently still abed. In the hallway outside her room, she found no trace of her confrontation with Thaddeus, no scuff marks, no displaced furniture. Inside her bedroom, everything was exactly as she had left it, including her valise, still packed and sitting on her bed. Catherine stood frozen in confusion. Had it all been a nightmare? A hallucination brought on by stress and fear of her impending marriage? But the scars on her neck and chest were real. And when she looked in the mirror, she saw something else. A subtle change in her eyes. They were still blue, still recognizably hers, but there was a depth to them now, a knowledge that hadn't been there before. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Catherine?" It was Elizabeth. "Are you awake? May I come in?" Catherine quickly pulled on her dressing gown to cover the scars before calling out permission. Elizabeth entered, looking perfectly normal, if a bit tired. "You're up early," her sister remarked. "Couldn't sleep? I don't blame you. With those Blackwoods in the house, there's something not right about them, especially that Thaddeus." Catherine stared at her in confusion. "Elizabeth, don't you remember our plan? I was going to run away last night." Elizabeth frowned. Run away? What are you talking about? The Blackwoods only arrived yesterday evening. Father hasn't even discussed marriage arrangements yet, though it's clear that's his intention. Catherine sat heavily on her bed, her mind reeling. According to Elizabeth, the previous night had passed without incident. The photograph had been taken, dinner had been served, and everyone had retired normally. There had been no pendant, no pursuit through the forest, no confrontation with eldritch entities. The photograph, Catherine said suddenly. Mr. Parker took our portrait last night. Has he developed it yet? I believe he's working on it this morning, Elizabeth replied, still looking concerned. Catherine, are you feeling well? You look pale. I'm fine, Catherine assured her, though she felt anything but. Just had strange dreams. After Elizabeth left, Catherine dressed quickly and made her way to the small room Mr. Parker had been given to use as a darkroom. She knocked and was admitted by the photographer, who was indeed in the process of developing their family portrait. Ah, Miss Sullivan, he greeted her. You're just in time. The image is almost ready. Catherine watched in tense silence as the photograph gradually appeared on the paper in the chemical bath. 5 young women in elegant dresses, arranged in a formal pose before the fireplace. Margaret in the center, Elizabeth behind her right shoulder, Catherine to her left, Anne beside her, and Josephine seated at Margaret's feet. At first glance, everything appeared normal. But as the image clarified, Catherine leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. There, just visible against her neck, was a small, dark shape, like a hand, with elongated fingers wrapped around her throat. Mr. Parker noticed it too. How strange, he murmured. A flaw in the negative, perhaps, or a shadow cast by the lighting. Would you like me to attempt another exposure? No, Catherine said quietly. It's perfect as it is. She knew then that it hadn't been a dream. Something had happened last night, something that had altered reality itself, rewriting the events to erase all evidence of the Blackwoods' true nature and the confrontation in the forest, but not completely. The photograph had captured a trace of the truth, preserved in silver and light. Over the following days, Catherine waited for the other shoe to drop, for Thaddeus to reappear, for the guardian to seek her out, for some consequence of her actions to manifest. But nothing extraordinary occurred. Dr. Blackwood sent a polite note canceling his family's visit, citing urgent business elsewhere. Henry Sullivan was disappointed but soon turned his attention to other potential matches for his daughters. Life at Rosehill Manor returned to normal, or what passed for normal. Yet Catherine knew things would never be truly normal again. She had glimpsed what lay beneath the veneer of reality, had confronted entities beyond human comprehension, and she had survived. The scars on her neck and chest remained, though they faded with time. Occasionally she would wake in the night, certain she had heard a voice calling to her from far away, a voice that spoke directly into her mind rather than her ears. But the presence never manifested, and eventually the calls ceased altogether. Years passed. Catherine never married, choosing instead to pursue education and eventually a career in photography, a decision that scandalized her father but which she found deeply satisfying. Her sisters married and moved away, starting families of their own. Rosehill Manor was sold when Henry Sullivan finally succumbed to financial ruin in 1915, unable to adapt to the changing industrial landscape. Catherine kept the photograph, though, the single image that proved she hadn't imagined everything. The 5 Sullivan sisters, frozen in time, with a 6th presence barely visible, a reminder of how close she had come to a fate worse than death. And sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, she would study it and wonder about the entities she had encountered. Were they truly gone, or merely waiting, patient beyond human understanding, for another doorway, another key, another vessel? The questions remained unanswered, and perhaps, Catherine reflected, that was for the best. Some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed again. I set down my magnifying glass, my hands trembling. The story of Catherine Sullivan and the Blackwoods had been lost to history, a footnote at most in local legends about the peculiar family that once occupied Ravenscroft before it burned to the ground in 1910, taking both Dr. Ambrose Blackwood and his son with it. But the photograph remained, and now, over a century later, I had discovered what Catherine had seen that night in 1908. The pendant's influence, captured on film, a ghostly hand wrapped around her throat. I glance at my own neck in the mirror across the room, at the strange birthmark that has always resembled fingers, the birthmark that appears in exactly the same place on my mother, my grandmother, And according to family records, on every firstborn daughter in our line since Catherine Sullivan. Outside, the storm continues to rage, and somewhere in the darkness, I swear I can hear something calling my name. The Sullivan sisters' photograph sits innocently in its frame, 5 young women frozen in time. But now that you know what to look for, perhaps you'll see it too. The unnatural shadow at Catherine's throat, the subtle distortion that becomes apparent only when you look closely enough. Sometimes the most terrifying truths are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally see them. And once seen, they can never be unseen again. Remember to like and subscribe to Shadow Frames for more hidden histories and photographic mysteries from the past. Until next time, look carefully at the shadows in your family albums. You never know what might be looking back.